your risk number 4 is European populism. Your report says 2019 will show that populists and protest movements are stronger than ever. So my question is, which countries are you worried about? I suppose Hungary, maybe Italy, perhaps Germany is on the list. But which countries, and what do these populist parties want?
In 2019, I'm actually not very worried about individual European countries. Again, we're out of recession. Wheels aren't falling off. Macron has a lot of problems, but you're not getting rid of him, and he does actually have all the power in France as the president in a way that, say, the UK Prime Minister is just elected directly by his own constituency. In the United States, you've got Congress separate from the executive. In France, it all does kind of come together, so there's a lot more opposition to him, which is interesting to think about. No, the problem in Europe is this year we have European parliamentary elections, and the European Parliament, we think the populists are set to get almost 40% total in that vote, which is a huge pickup from where they were before, which means the European Parliament and the bureaucrats are suddenly going to be really divided between pro-Europe and Eurosceptic. And that is yet one more thing that makes Europe less relevant, harder to manage, harder to govern, harder to respond to the next crisis when it hits, harder to be an effective partner with the United States when we're ready to be an effective partner ourselves, harder to negotiate effectively with Brexit as it goes through. That's the single biggest thing in 2019. Though, I mean, you have the Italians with the challenging negotiations with Brussels on budget. You have the French now massively shooting through their fiscal constraints, and that undermines the ability to do better governance and fiscal consolidation.
So it's mostly weakening Europe.
It's mostly weakening Europe on the back of this continuing expansion of populism,
And what do you
less worried about Germany, by the way.
So going back to Orban and Hungary, it gets to your themes of us versus them and a G0 world. What do you make of, how do you assess the argument, the sort of intellectual and moral argument that these parties want to defend Christian traditions or European traditions? How do you sort of pick that apart? What do you make of it? Does it have validity?
It's interesting that there isn't a question that deserves to be discussed as to whether the tribalism, the ethno-nationalism, and the religious nationalism that the reactionary right, the populist right embraces to get the support of the disenfranchised, is that somehow more attractive and more powerful than the class identity politics from the populist left, right? Is it stickier? Is it easier to pick up the disenfranchised? I mean, certainly, Marx and Lenin ultimately figured that out, right? Like, it's hard to get the proletarians of the world to actually unite. They fly under their more tribal flags when they get really pissed off. But there has been third way politics in Europe. Syriza has been the biggest pickup opportunistically from what was a real depression in Greece that they're still going through, and that's not Eurosceptic at all. It's pro-Europe, it's pro-Euro. And it's working within existing institutions. Podemos in Spain, same thing. And even though Trump is president in the United States, we mentioned AOC already. You'd look at Bernie Sanders. I mean, Bernie could be president if it wasn't for the fact that the Democratic leadership controlled the nomination process of what was a very opaque and non-democratic process, right? So, I mean, it's unclear to me how much we want to rest on the argument that people are getting really pissed off in democracies and therefore the far right is going to be the unique beneficiary. It's not clear to me, but I think that needs data. That needs more exploration. I am certainly sympathetic to a lot of people that feel like the system has been rigged against them, turning to people that promise that they're going to break those vested elites. I'm not very sympathetic to Christian nationalism, especially because, let's face it, so much of, I like separation of church and state. I like a more ecumenical view. I mean, I happen to be a Christian, I happen to believe in God, but my view of what God is pretty ecumenical, and I really don't like it when other people tell me that their view of God is better than mine, and I expect that that is true of most people.
You should be a Unitarian.
Yeah, no, I like more smells and bells than Unitarians, and I
Okay.
was raised Catholic,
Okay.
so I have a little bit of pushback personally, but I think that we'd be better off, right, if more governments recognize that Unitarianism is safer, right? You just don't want to govern people
Right.
with strong religious beliefs because it's too exclusionary, it's problematic. And the Hungarians are, let's face it, it's great if you're us, it sucks if you're them. And that's why has Trump done so well with his base. He does so well with his base because he tells you that they are bad.
Right.
And that our country will not be, we won't even recognize our country if we can't build a wall. Why? To keep them out, right? I mean, that's a strong message.